All right, Sarah. Well, let's just jump right into it. So I know you wanted to talk about myth busting with posture today. So what are some of the questions or things that you kind of want to go over?
I think some of the things that we should talk about actually is going to be what are the most common injuries that we have that we're seeing right now, especially, I mean, we see a lot. Our primary demographic right now is elite athletes in general, but we focus a lot on baseball, right? And we're in season. So we've got a lot of them.
Yeah, so I think the most common injuries that I'm seeing, at least from the guys that I'm working with right now, and I know that you're working with some similar stories, are going to be shoulder impingement, TOS, and then kind of an umbrella, like an umbrella of that would be ulnar nerve pain, and then low back tightness or like SI joint pain would be kind of the common stuff that we're seeing a lot of right now.
Yeah. A lot of Tommy John recovery guys too
hmm
that aren't playing currently, but are in recovery. So,
So if
uh,
we were to start at the shoulder and let's just kind of break down TOS and what's going on with that. So when you're talking to guys who are dealing with TOS, what are kind of the common things that they're telling you?
I think a lot of times when we're breaking it down, because the idea is trying to figure out what they know about it and what the doctors have told them, it seems like a lot of them don't have an actual true answer of what's causing it or what the reason it's there. So a lot of times they're being diagnosed, our guys are being diagnosed, and this kind of goes overall. Someone's being diagnosed with something, and then it kind of ends from there. And what is the next steps? And so I think where we're coming from and what's really important that's not talked about is why is TOS present right now and how does it just show like question for everyone is how come TOS shows up and then how does it magically disappear? Or if it does disappear, who diagnoses that it's cured or gone? If that makes sense. So, I mean, one thing that we're constantly looking at obviously is what we call posture or position. And right now, we're kind of dealing everyone is being affected by that right now. And if we look at the shoulder, they're just, especially with the trainers and PTs and all the doctors, they're all constantly looking at the shoulder. And obviously, TOS is thoracic outlet syndrome. And so they're looking at the shoulder, the pec, the upper back, right? But you and I are seeing a different perspective of that, right?
Yeah,
And
I
that's
think the big sort of question or the underlying missing thing to this is how is the rest of the body affecting the shoulder and where it's currently positioned. So looking at the shoulder and the shoulder position isn't wrong. Like we do have to change the shoulder position to get the TOS to go away, but it's not just about the shoulder because of how everything else is connecting into it. So if you were to expand off of that, what would you kind of say to somebody who's like, how the hell is my hip or my ankle going to affect my shoulder?
well, to be honest, it's even trying to go into getting those guys to even understand that it's not just the shoulder and trying to show that there's a reaction. So everything in the body is connected. And that's kind of where the missing link is of what we're seeing in a lot of the medical field is that it's very symptomatic driven. And so the shoulder position is important, but what they're not understanding is that the position of the shoulder is how are you changing it without manually manipulating it, first of all. And number one is like they're not even looking at the position of the shoulder. They're looking at the joint and what it looks like inside, right? But because everything is connected, that's where we come into play and how the pelvis is connected to the shoulder by the spine. And so when you address one thing, there's a reaction throughout the body. And one thing that I've been talking about is kind of like throwing a pebble into a pond or a lake. There's a ripple effect and it goes everywhere. So the body's kind of the same thing.
So how would you describe that ripple effect from something that we always say, muscles move bones?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go in and get manually manipulated and they try to pull this shoulder back or they make an adjustment and I don't know, it's not the right word, but like crack or manipulate
Like a
to where
chiropractor, like pushing it into a position.
sure, or having somebody look at the muscular point level and actually try to release or lengthen or activate a muscle, right? In turn, they're looking for that position to change as well. So what we're looking at, right, is that muscles move bones because muscles, the origin and the insertion is to the end of a bone, no matter what. Okay. And so the reason why we talk about that is because if the muscle's not doing its correct job, and that's kind of another, like when we're talking about myth busting and talking about common misconceptions, is that yes, we can talk about what a muscle's job is and what it's supposed to do. I like to describe it as the design job because that's what we learn in anatomy, right? That's what we went to school for.
Hmm.
Think about it. What was the primary thing you learned when we started working together and you were using all of your education from, college?
I was sitting here thinking, okay, well, hip flexor's meant to do this, so it does it. And very quickly I realized that the hip flexor doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do because of the position that you're in, right? So it was like a complete 180 on the line of thinking that I had from what I was being taught while I was in school to what you and I would jump on the phone and talk about when we would do our education calls is like, okay, well, in this class, they're teaching me that this muscle does X, Y, and Z. But if it's not doing X, Y, and Z, and this other muscle is doing it, then what's the problem or the consequence that occurs because of that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of factors into that. So like for every posture therapist that I've certified or in the clinics and everything, it's crazy because if they come from a PT background with they've already gone and gotten their like doctorate, right? They have to unlearn things. It's insane and it's really hard to grasp, especially when you dedicate so much time in your education career about it. But what's crazy is that muscles don't have to do that job. So when we go into college, we get all these different degrees, we go through this process. They're teaching us what the job is supposed to do, right? Or what that muscle is supposed to do. But what they don't talk about is that that muscle actually doesn't have to do that. But what they also don't teach us is how does that muscle know their identified design job? And what is that? Like, how does a muscle learn its job? It has to be stimulated appropriately. And so, by design, right now, we're not hunting and gathering, but that's why we're here and to keep our species alive.
So as we're talking about these compensation patterns that occur, like one of the really common ones that we see in not just athletes that we work with, but like literally every person on the planet from how we function is the upper trap dominance. So how does the upper trap dominance relate to TOS as we're kind of talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one thing is, I don't know if you can pull it up. Like, can you pull up a trap
Let me pull.
diagram? So the reason why we kind of went a little sideways away from the question about muscles and shoulder position is because we kind of had to get to the place of talking about how, yeah, this is awesome, how muscles actually don't have to do their job. So if you look at the trap, guy, and this is also really important because I think a lot of people think of the trap is only that upper trap area, like on top of the shoulders,
Yeah, this
right?
upper segment right here.
Yeah. And so one thing you want to know about guys, like especially when you see something that's really obvious, like Arnold Schwarzenegger or anyone who does a lot of body lifting, right? We see a lot of huge traps and it kind of becomes like this V. So what happens is this muscle group is actually you can cut it into three different sections because if you look at the grains of the muscles, first of all, the insertion and origin, guys, that's where the muscle attaches to the different bone, excuse me, to the different bones. All right. And so you have to understand where those insertion and origin points are because as the muscle contracts or lengthens or relaxes, you can see how the bones move because bones don't actually move by themselves. And so if you look at the grain of the trap, your upper trap, the grains go up, the mid trap they go out, and then you see the lower trap they kind of go down, right? And what happens is that the upper trap and a lot of them is heavily compensated because like what Connor was saying, we see it come up and it actually kind of holds everyone together. And naturally, not to go off topic of muscle work, but like we also hold a lot of stress inside this muscle group as well, especially up top in the neck and the shoulders. Does that make sense? So what happens is those guys engage, and what they're doing is they're actually taking away jobs from even just the basics of the mid lower trap, because that lower trap and rhomboids, that's where a lot of the times we see the what we would identify as weakness. And going, I mean, we're gonna have to talk about the like people define strength and weakness differently. And so that's gonna be a whole nother, topic that we can talk about another time. But what happens is that upper trap takes a lot of that workload, but because it takes all the workload, it actually eliminates jobs from other different muscle groups, and the lower and mid traps. So if you think about it, if you're sitting down listening to this, like what happens when your upper trap engages?
Shrug up.
And what happens? Think about all the bones. Now, as you're sitting there, even if you're just sitting and if your butt is against a chair like mine right now, and your spine like stay simple, but as you shrug up, right? Think about it. Feel your ribs come up, obviously your scaps and shoulders come up, right? The spine changes. So from one movement, there is that that ripple effect, right? And as you sit there and you shrug up, what else are you feeling? I mean, even your butt changes in the chair.
Well, I think the thing for me that I feel change is you feel your upper back and your mid back round forward. And as we're talking about the low to mid trap, right? Like a lot of times you'll see me say this in a bunch of videos, but this lower to mid segment is what creates this T-spine extension as we're trying to throw. So if your upper trap is kicking up and rounding you forward this way, you have a much more difficult time being able to get yourself upright through that mid back.
I mean, and that, guys, that talks about like when think about what those pitching coaches are asking you guys to do. That thoracic extension. That's basic stuff. Okay, so let's go back to TOS. We don't have a front view of that, do we?
Not off the top of my head. No, I don't have one.
Okay. So, but if you pull up, can you pull up like the maps of nerves? So when we go
Yes.
to TOS. So now everyone stay put where they are when like talking about the most basic of this trap being over contracted and working really hard, right? This position here. Okay. Now, if we look at everything inside, so what people don't talk about is the position of the body and how it relates to the symptoms that are occurring currently, and then everything that's inside the body. So, obviously, I'm going to stay really basic, but like the heart, the lungs, your intestines, right? And then we can go into the nerves. And so, a lot of times, if you look at the nerves, look what happens. So there's a massive, right? So there's a massive amount of nerve bundles that sits inside of your shoulder, like pocket area right here. And if the position of the shoulder is up and rounded forward, right? What happens? Like what can happen? Think about all these diagnoses that we're hearing. Like, is anyone surprised that we're seeing these things?
And I would say no. So just to like give you a visual of that, right? Like if we're sitting and rather than being in this upright position, if we're here, here, and here, how does the position of this bone change and the level of compression that occurs in the front of the shoulder? So TOS is a pretty blanket umbrella term with various types of reasons for what it is, right? But the issue is the compression of the blood vessels and the nerves that run through here that then cause all of those symptoms to show up lower into the elbow or the hand as a result of it. So like for me, I know this all too well, having had three elbow surgeries, all involving my ulnar nerve as well as a TJ mixed in there. But if the issue was actually my elbow and the nerve, then the surgeries would have fixed it. But the issue was coming from the way that the shoulder is positioned and the level of compression on that nerve, which is then causing the symptom. So we have to look one layer deeper than where is the issue at, but rather what is really the root cause of that issue.
Here, use this, Connor. Um, what's crazy is again, when it comes to the position in shoulder and everything that's inside, we're still on a really superficial layer in the perspective of what we're looking at through like posture therapy, right? Because right now we're still kind of symptom driven and we want to talk about and kind of open the door with another perspective of some of the things that you guys are hearing about. Does that make sense? So, um, if you look at what's happening and when you're seeing the dumping of the shoulder, and we're talking about TOS, we're talking about ulnar nerve issues, we're talking about Tommy John. I mean, we'll go into ligaments, but ligaments is the same exact thing as nerves and muscle issues and anything that's itis. Does that make sense? And so when we're looking at these maps, look at it. So if we are out of the designed position, right? Because all of these pieces that exist in the body, they're perfectly designed to sit in a certain way. And none of us look like this anymore. And just so you know, if you guys do look like this, that's awesome. But most of the time, you're going to be hunting and gathering and wearing a leaf to
which is not what we
try.
do.
And we don't do that. And we're dealing with a lot of like crazy weather, but that's what we're designed to do is trying to figure out how to survive all some of the crazy stuff that's happening in the world naturally, uh, or not. So why are we looking like this now? Is another question because then I want to kind of go back to, I think, well, let's actually finish about how everything is connected because then we have to talk about why do we look like this, right? We work out. We, some of you guys are in the train, like are training 8 to 10 hours a day. Like you're in the facility that long. It's crazy. And why aren't we looking like this? There's a reason why. But so one thing you can, if you look at this and you look at all of these nerves and where they come out and where they kind of wrap around and go through, do you understand? And we want you to like call us, shoot an email, whatever, reach out because this, if this doesn't make sense, we want to try to clarify that. But if you look at this, do you see why there might be some compression or impingement happening up top? Right?
The most common kind of way that people get rid of TOS, at least from like a surgical means, is removing that first rib. So I would love if you could kind of dive, Sarah, into not only how the first rib relates to this graphic, but how it relates to all of those yellow nerves that you see running through here and why they remove it, but also why it isn't successful.
Yeah. So in my career, where when they've gotten the first rib removed, it's about 50-50, and it typically comes back for the success. Um, now we're non-medical, so that number is irrelevant. But in my case, with my, I've been doing this for 15 years, that's essentially the rate that I'm looking at so far. And so if you look at all the nerves that are coming through, guys, and if you look at the collarbone and you look at how that first rib, right, where it's inserted, where it comes around, and how many nerves are sitting upon that, and then think about the compression of what's happening up into the trap and what's happening there's where you're seeing it all. So what they're trying to eliminate is the pressure, right? And the impingement of those nerves. And so their answer is to remove that rib to open the space.
But
Okay.
doesn't
Very
change the
basic.
reason for why the space isn't there in the first place. And that's the issue.
And we are designed to have that. And the issue is because this muscle, for some reason, right? It's not that anyone is broken, it's doing it for a reason is super contracted, right? And it's pulling you forward. That's how basic it needs to stay, right? And so by eliminating that rib, it creates space. Think about if we were to eliminate that rib right there. Think about how much space becomes or is created between the nerves, the collarbone, and then that second rib. That's the theory of where they're going with it. Okay. And so I mean, I am filled with analogies. And so I like to talk about working as a team and I talk about the muscles as people. And because most of our guys are on team sports and the relationship between the team, you know when a team is not kind of like jiving well, or when a catcher and a pitcher aren't working well together, or they're new together because they're not on the same page. If you look at this whole entire diagram, it's essentially like a baseball field, right? And everyone has a very, in theory, everyone has a very specific job. And if everyone is able to do their job at 100% capacity, it's essentially almost a flawless game. And the team is untouchable, right? And we see it, and then we see it fall apart, right? We can have a super awesome team, and then something changes. They either do a trade, or someone goes somewhere, or someone becomes injured, and then it falls to the wayside, right? And no one actually really talks about that and how much it affects the team. I mean, there is talk, but to close the loop, right? Every muscle has a very designed job, and because those muscles don't have to do their very specific job, then that's what's happening. And it's pulling it all, the whole body forward, right? So, as muscles also work in pairs, that's another thing that people don't really talk about, right? So, if that, if the anterior side were, somebody was just recently talking to us about pec work, right?
Mhm.
So muscles are designed to do two things only, and that's to contract and to relax, or some people think of it as like a lengthening mechanism, right? But to lengthen, it has to relax. But in turn, there's a very specific relationship between those two different muscles to get that perfect position between each muscle, the pairing muscle. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I think I know we're talking about TOS, but from like a muscle perspective, I think this will do a really good job of alluding to that. And what we're looking at is the relationship between your hamstring and your quad and how one muscle is going to impact the other muscle. So I'll let you kind of dive into this, Sarah, because you were on a roll.
Yeah, so if we look, I mean, even if you look at the images here, it's kind of hard to see to the naked eye, to be honest. But if you look at the anterior side, which would be your quad, and the hamstring is your posterior side of the body, right? Those two work together. All right. And then I'm going to geek out on that insertion and origin portion. Like it attaches to the pelvis and they both meet up at the end of the femur, right? And so what happens is if one is over contracted, the other one is going to be over lengthened. Okay, so a lot of people talk about I have tight hamstrings. I have such tight hamstrings, I can't touch my toes, blah, 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 right? And so the thing is, if that hamstring is super tight, what do you think the quad looks like?
Condensed.
And so, what does the hamstring look like
It over lengthens.
if the hamstring's tight?
Hmm.
Yeah. So the that's where you have to see the relationship because you need this beautiful relationship between the two different muscles that can come to a neutral state. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the other thing that's important about this, just because we're looking front back, is we need balance from left to right, top to bottom, and front to back. Like there's three different planes that we move in, not to get too in depth with it, but these relationships are occurring all over your body. So scoliosis is a primary example of this imbalance where one side is pulling the vertebrae this way, the other side's pulling it this way, and we end up in a very cockeyed position because there isn't that balance from these equal and opposite relationships that we're talking about.
Scoliosis is a crazy topic. It's gonna have to be another call again because like that made a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it made a lot of sense to you guys, but scoliosis is deemed multiple different things. It's a disease, it's this, it's that. The way that we view it, muscles move bones, like it's a compensation is what it is what Connor just said. And it happens. And it actually comes from like all three planes, right? The hip decides to elevate, right? One side elevates. So then those muscles contract on one side, they're over lengthened on the other, and then all of a sudden this rotation happens. And then what happens is that the shoulder, one shoulder works with the opposite hip, and it's this whole entire thing. And what's insane is that the body is so intelligent that it does this kind of torsion motion, but the reason why it's doing it is literally to keep that person upright and be able to function every day. It's not because anything is wrong with them. And what then they want to do is they want to stick a rod in it, which is fine, but it's still not addressing those muscles that move bones, right? And so it again, there's a lot of things that good things that come out of it. There's a lot of other things that aren't unspoken about a lot of times. Um,
So to bring it back to TOS, and at least kind of the common stuff that we see that guys use outside of the first rib removal surgery that we already kind of discussed, what are some of the other kind of common things that you see guys use as ways to try to combat TOS?
yeah, they like to use bands and they roll out and it doesn't work, guys.
Or the Botox injection that we get works for 2 weeks and then it comes back.
Right. And so I think it's really being able to look at the very basics of why the TOS showed up, right? And if we look at the position of the shoulder, it's because there's a lot of impingement and compression happening, which affects all the way down and how you're throwing, how you feel, how you sleep. But realistically, now to kind of dive a little bit deeper, that we spent that much time talking about the shoulder and what's inside, like shoulder isn't necessarily the issue, guys. And changing the shoulder position is a little bit more complex than changing the actual shoulder. Because if you looked at some of those diagrams that we pulled up, the shoulder is also attached to the spine, and the spine is attached to the pelvis, and the pelvis has two other limbs, the femurs, and then the tib, fib, and ankles and feet. And so those all change as well because the relationship within all these loading joints depend on each other. They literally depend on each other. And so when we talk about muscles not being able to do their specific job and what Connor was talking about in his specific situation, and when he learned that muscles don't have to do that job, a lot of time there's a lot of reasons why the muscle doesn't do their job. And there's like one is position wise, the way that it's positioned, it may or may not be able to do its specific job. Kind of looking at the last diagram we looked at, one side was over contracted, one side was over lengthened, right? And position wise, they couldn't get to their neutral state.
Well, let me show you. So, like, obviously, these pictures aren't necessarily the exact point in time in which I was dealing with the surgeries, but I was still having ulnar nerve pain at this point. And these are like my original set of photos. So, if you were to look at my right arm and shoulder, no shit, I have ulnar nerve problems because that thing is way out in Timbuktu, not doing what it's
Can
supposed to
you
do.
zoom into it really quickly? Yeah, guys, look at that thing. So what we're looking at the basics is like think about yes, the photo is compromised slightly, but what we're looking at is like his ear position, his shoulder position, the middle of his hip, his knee and ankle.
So, I mean, if we're just looking at this, right, like the amount of upper trap activation that has to be going on here to pull me into that position, it's pulling the shoulder forward and kicking the elbow back, which is that exact position that I was just demonstrating a little bit ago of what's creating that compression. So, the issue of me having 3 elbow surgeries wasn't the actual elbow, it was because of this. And it wasn't until I actually changed what was going on in this region that my pain went away. But
But
it
how did you even change that?
it's not just like, hey, let's do scap retraction exercises or let's strengthen your mid trap because all of these other misalignments, like this right hip being elevated, throwing me way off to the side, are going to impact what that shoulder is physically capable of doing. Like everyone wants to talk about overhead lengthening their lat, right? Well, if my shoulder and upper back are in that position based off of where that lat inserts or originates up here and then inserts down here, it's not going to be able to fully lengthen, which is then just going to put more stress into the elbow as a result of that.
Yeah. Can you go to that side profile on that right side again?
Yep.
All right, if you guys look as well, like look at his ankle to knee. Look how far forward his knee is from his ankle. Just try to stand up and try to do that, right? It's near impossible.
There's a lot of work to hold yourself in that Michael Jackson lane.
Yeah. And then you've got the knee to hip, right? We've got the anterior hip and a little bit of this sway back action happening,
In the
right?
rotation.
And rotation, which most of us who play sports, most sports are rotational sports. We all have rotation. It's an asymmetry that for sure is one of the most common. So, all in all, the shoulder position, it relies heavily on the other loading joints, the ankle, knee, and hip. Okay. And I think your story is uh you got put into what, like active groin stretch and stood up or something like that?
So I did frog, frog pullovers, and air bench. And I set up and threw a baseball pain free for the first time in 6 years.
Yeah. So those are primarily hip, like hip driven exercises, guys. But the react, think about the going back to
The
the
ripple
ripple
effect.
effect. The demand of that exercise was in the hip, and so that's where we were looking for the change. But the reaction is really what we were looking for because a lot of times we're going to go to the shoulder and the shoulder doesn't give us what we want. And it's because the root problem wasn't at the shoulder. The symptoms were. The impingement was there, the ligaments, the Tommy John. Yeah, that all existed, but
So
it was all
I
reactions.
think another really important point here, Sarah, is like my rehab, whether it was my first ulnar nerve, Tommy John, or the third surgery with the ulnar nerve again, is everything focused on my forearm, like releasing all those tight muscles and then strengthening my scap. So nothing attacked the rest of my body. But the thing that I didn't fully understand until I met you was that doing these PT exercises is great in theory. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do them,
You
but
gotta follow
the thing,
protocol.
the thing that you have to consider is this work going into the appropriate muscle correctly, or is it increasing the compensation patterns that I have? So, like my scap being in this position as I'm doing IYs and Ts, I can't get into my scap. So, I'm dumping into my trap to make this happen, which is only going to make this compensation worse and put me into a worse position, which is going to make that surgery even less successful than it was likely going to be when we went into it.
Yeah, and you went to the best of the best, man. You went to some top dogs.
I did,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
still ended up sitting in this chair.
yeah. And that's the thing, guys. Like, there's some really great resources and really awesome guys that are out there. And there's just some things that there's some missing links. And it's not that they're wrong or that anything that they're bad, that anything went different. It's a perspective that you have to look at because at just because you get surgery, you still got to take responsibility of your own health and your performance. I mean, here's the thing for everyone that, all of us have been elite players at some point. And listen, we're not as good as we were or are now because we just sat and it was all natural. We put in the time. And this is just one of those things, right? And it's not to necessarily add, it's a perspective to pay attention to and to learn how to advocate for yourself and learning about you and your body and like position matters. And it's not forcing the position. And what the biggest thing is that we are human and we have a design and no one's paying attention to that. So, how do you work? I think with all the modalities all of us have gone through or we see, like, I've seen some crazy stuff in my career, but honestly, I mean, at what point are we going to work with the design of our body and allow it and find opportunity for it to do what it's designed to do? Because it's insanely intelligent. But with it being insanely intelligent, it's also the best. I mean, all species are designed essentially this way. Like the brain is constantly looking for a cheat mechanism, constantly, because it's constantly looking for efficiency. And with efficiency comes what we're looking at today.
I think the other big thing to that, just to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, is like when I was 15, 16, 18 years old, going in and out of these doctor's appointments, is I expected somebody else to do the work for me and to fix me and to me not have to do it myself. So what I mean by that
Yeah.
is I walked in, they're like, "Oh, we're going to do this to your nerve. It should resolve it." I was like, "Perfect. Like that sounds like the best answer. Nobody else is giving me an answer. Let's do it." Went into the surgery, did my rehab, did everything that they told me to do. Issue came back. Go into TJ, do the TJ rehab, issue comes back. Go into the third one. I'm like, at this point, like, what the hell is going on? But I didn't try to look for any of these other things. I didn't try to do extra work or extra stretching or extra this. Like I was just like, hey, you gave me a plan. This is what I'm going to do. And that's on me, like 100%. I didn't do the extra things or try to look for the extra things to put myself in a better position until it kind of just hit me smack dab in the face randomly through an internship.
And those doctors don't know.
They're not looking for it.
They're not looking for it. And it's not that they're looking for it and that they're wrong. It's that they're also in the same position, right? They've been trained, they're using all the resources they have. They're trying to learn something new and what's up and coming all the time. But again, like you got to learn how to advocate for yourself, right? And that's hard to do in general. Even being 15. I broke my back when I was 19. There's no way. So, but well, so conclusion. What's our conclusion in regards to TOS, ulnar nerve? I know we really talked a lot about ulnar nerve, but at this point, do you think that you can, if you were to look at somebody, if anyone who listens to this, do you think that they could take pictures of themselves and see and maybe say, hey, maybe there is a reason why I have this situation happening?
I mean, I would hope so. I think
Yeah,
the biggest kind of takeaway that I have is the amount of the amount of out of position that you are doesn't always correlate to the amount of symptoms that you have. So like one person could look in a really bad spot and not have any symptoms, and somebody else who looks like they're in a good spot. But it's all about how your body, specifically you, respond to that. So just as fast as you can get your body out of position, you can get it back into position just as quickly and change this thing for yourself. It's not something that you need somebody else to do for you. And quite honestly, if you expect somebody else to do it for you, you're going to end up in a poor position where you look back and you're like, I really wish I took charge of that for myself.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on to the next one, huh?
Yeah, on to the next one. Well, I appreciate you, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Have a great one.